This week in our Bible year journey, we are flipping the page from the Old Testament to the New Testament. One simple page flip, and we are in the New Testament. But that motion, that one page, represents 400 years of time. 400 years. I want you to think for just a moment about America 400 years ago. Squarely in the beginnings of the 1600s, Jamestown was just barely being settled. Shakespeare was alive and popular all over the place. The King James Bible had come onto the scene, and the first English dictionary was formed. This time was marked with wars, and it ended with witch trials. 400 years ago. Such a different time than today. And the same was true the time between the end of the Old Testament and the beginning of the New Testament. As we completed the books of prophecy, the Hebrew people were living during the Persian period. And in 400 years, empires rose and they fell. They went from the Persians to the Greeks to the Romans. Leaders came and they went, Alexander the Great, all the way through to King Herod in the New Testament. The global economy changed from an agricultural villages and towns focus to these big cities with these more developed roads and this commerce system. From the Old Testament to the New Testament, the Israelites, who we have been talking about for the last 8 months, became known as the Jews, and that's the term that is used. And the temple, which has been the epicenter of worship for all communities, is now fused with King Herod's palace, and government is tied in deeply. And one more big change, there is a new professional class on the scene, a professional religious class called the Pharisees. And you will hear them talked about throughout the Gospels. So let's talk a little bit about what is a gospel? What does gospel mean? Gospel is a literary style. We've been talking about literary styles, right? You remember this from your English classes. There are novels, there are biographies, there are poems and poetry, there's apocryphal writing. Gospel is another literary style, and it means good news. And it's not considered, as some would say, a purely historical account of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, but it's more than that. And the Reverend Jim Harnish says that the gospel is a proclamation grounded in history that invites people to be in the presence of Christ. Then we have 4 gospels in the New Testament, and they were each written at slightly different times, following and looking back on their time with Christ. And they are written with different details, and the details are in slightly different order in each of the 4 gospels. And the audiences, the purpose for the gospel that they would receive is different. For some, they're written to Israelites, to the Jews, and some they're written to Gentiles. Some they're written more broadly. They're different. So the gospels are written slightly differently. And for some people today reading the gospels, this can be quite intimidating. And they might try to synchronize them to get all the details on the same page. But the early church gave us a good thing when they remind us that the difference in the details is not a problem, but actually a gift. We get a well-rounded picture of Jesus looking at these 4 different accounts, slightly different accounts of his life. And this is a good thing for us. So let's dive into Matthew, which is where we are today, the first book of the New Testament. But here's a fun fact that's really just a side note. Scholars actually believe that Matthew is not the oldest of the Gospels, but in fact it was Mark. Now, I don't know why the early church canon made it Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John instead of Mark being first, but Matthew is where we are. And Matthew was written primarily to a Jewish audience. So these people are primarily considered insiders, for lack of a better term. And these people find themselves and they're belonging to a community that, because of Jesus's interactions, have made fundamental changes in the way that they practice the Torah. So for generations, the Jews have practiced the laws of the Torah, following each and every letter to the law, being important and rehearsed on how they interact with the world. And Jesus has come onto the scene and interrupted their thinking, interrupted their practice. And so Matthew is called to write this for this audience to help them see that Jesus is fulfilling these works, not changing them. He's reminding the people that God was not simply found on the pages of the Word of the Old Testament, in the writings of the Old Testament, but that God is found in Jesus, in the embodied person of Jesus. And we can see this at action in our text today. Matthew chapter 5, verse 17. Do not think that I have come to abolish the laws or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but fulfill. These are the words of Jesus. The audience, as I said in Matthew, would have known the meaning of the law. They would have known the laws being the Old Testament, the ones we read in Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy. They know the prophets, which we just finished reading, the major and the minor prophets and their call for justice. And Jesus tells the people, look, I didn't come here to get rid of all of that. I didn't come here to wipe away everything you always knew. Instead, I came to fulfill it. Now, I don't know what you think of when you think of fulfilling, but I'm not going to lie to you. I think of when I place a Target order, they're going to fulfill my order and they're going to complete it and I'm going to go pick it up. Okay, that's not the fulfillment here. Fulfillment is the act in the biblical term of pushing something forward or amplifying it, revving up the action of it. So the first hearers of this word would have been hearing Jesus say, we gave you the Torah and the Torah is good. And what Jesus would say is, I'm here to help amplify it, to help bring it to meaning. The theme of fulfillment will come up again and again in Matthew's gospel. It sounded almost like a mantra that Jesus is saying, I am here to fulfill this, to bring emphasis to the words of the Old Testament. And this is quite comforting to them and to us. In fact, in verse 18, it reminds them that the laws are never going to go away, that all heaven and earth would have to pass away before the laws went away. This is a good and comforting thing. Now, in the next two verses, we begin to uncover one of the most impactful lessons from Jesus that will be repeated over and over again. And you can see it on the screen. In these two verses talk about behaviors, and they talk about following the commandments. And the gist is, it says we must follow the commandments of God, and we must lead others to do so. And in fact, we must do it better than the Pharisees and the scribes. Do you remember who I said the Pharisees were? Pharisees are that professional religious group that are now on the scene. And they are the important people in the temple who are telling everybody else how to interpret the scriptures. And Jesus comes in there and he says, they may have earned their living, do this, they may do this very well, but I need you to do it better than them. And the people, you can almost just say, but how? How are we supposed to, how would God expect us to be better than the Pharisees? But I think what we'll come to discover is that Jesus here is not talking about following the rules for the letter of the law. Jesus is talking about the intentionality of our hearts. And Jesus explains this, so let's keep going. Verse 21 begins this next section. And the next section of our scripture is actually not verse 21, it's 21 verses. And it's broken down into 6 sections, and we're not going to read it all today because we all have, other things that we need to be doing, and that's okay. But these sections start over and over again with this distinctive style. And they say, you have heard it said, but I say to you. You have heard it said, meaning the ancient laws are things that you have heard before. And Jesus is expanding on them, not saying, you've heard it said, just forget all of that, try something new. No, Jesus is saying, you have heard it said, and I'm going to take it one level further. This happens over and over again throughout the Gospel of Matthew. And this is an important tool for you to remember as you are reading the Gospel of Matthew over the next week and a half, I think it is. And so if we had time to cover all 6 of these, we could look at them in detail. But we're going to look at just the first couple. But I can't help to say, before we jump into that, we have Bible Year classes. If you want to join us where you can talk about each and every individual verse, Join us Sunday mornings in person if you live here in Nassau County, or 6 p.m. on Zoom on Wednesday nights. You can join me and we can talk. But I do want to talk about this first section. So the verse are going to appear on the screen. It says, "You have heard it said in the ancient times, 'You shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment.' But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, 'You fool,' you will be liable to the fire, to the hell of fire." Well, daggum. This gets more and more. Do you see this pattern? Jesus is saying, you have heard it said. We remember the Old Testament verses. You shall not murder. It is in Exodus, in those 10 commandments. You shall not murder. And Jesus is seeming to say, well, we tried that. And as you've read the Old Testament, there is a lot of killing in the Old Testament. So let's try something new. Maybe there's something more than just the act of murder. Killing is bad, but it's the anger inside of you that he is worried about. That is the problem. Jesus is saying that yes, we need to follow the letter of the law, but that is not enough for our lives of faith. That it's the intentionality under our lives of faith that God is deeply concerned about. Think about our world today. We all know people, maybe you or them, maybe it's your friends or your family, and they seem to be these people who hold on to anger. Something makes them angry and they bury it deep down inside. And they just push it further and further and further until suddenly everybody in the world is out to get them. Everybody in their family is out to get them, and nothing seems to make them happy. And anger can build and build and build if it is left to fester in our souls. Practically speaking, anger has negative effects on a person's overall health. Some sources say that after the 2 hours after an angry outburst, the risk for a heart episode doubles. And prolonged pent-up anger can raise the levels of the potential for stroke, a weakened immune system, anxiety, depression. Not to mention all of the effects of the anger being pent up on our families, on our relationships. Jesus knew this. Jesus was telling the people of the time, killing is bad, of course, but it's actually anger, and the pent up anger that is worse and can have a far lasting impact on a grand number of people. So you may be hearing this and think, oh gosh, I'll never measure up. What now? I get angry. I don't know if you're anything like me, but sometimes it happens. I get angry and I don't even know it's happening. Picture being cut off in traffic. Immediately, you might get angry. You didn't try not to get angry. It just happened. So what is Jesus saying? And in fact, if you take this literally, Jesus actually breaks this own commandment. Later in the gospel, this very gospel, Jesus gets angry. And when he walks into the temple and they're selling things in the temple, and what does he do? He walks over and he flips the tables over. He's angry. So if Jesus gets angry, and we get angry, we don't always mean to get angry, what does Jesus mean? This is how we read the scriptures. This is what we're talking about here, is we have to read the words and not stop just at the words. We have to look deeply into the text. And thankfully, in this case, Jesus answers this for us. So what do we do with the anger? If we know it's a part of our lives, because Jesus had it and we have it, how do we handle it? And Jesus says in the next few verses, he says, so when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go and first be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Well, this statement is a classic radicalization from Jesus and a common tool that Jesus is using throughout the Gospels. Stopping in mid-gift giving or altar, taking your gift to the altar, the people of the time would have never done that. They have to walk a long way. It's a huge process to give their gifts. To stop in mid-gift, to go reconcile and come back, it's not practical. They would not have done that. So they would have read this. One commentary was telling me that they would have read this and said, okay, well, what does Jesus mean The point isn't the act of stopping in mid-gift. Again, there's something more to it. The point is reconciliation, right? That what Jesus is talking about here is reconciliation and relationships. Jesus seems to be saying that our emotions are a part of who we are. We will get angry. We will have sin in our lives. It is a part of who we are. But what do we do with that? How do we come as whole people before God? I think sometimes, my friends, we get this opinion that we can only go to worship once we have everything squared away. Or if we don't have everything squared away, we just have to go and pretend that everything is squared away while we're at church, right? We have to pretend because we must be at church. And what I'm hearing in the gospel today is that Jesus cares deeply for you and for me. And that Jesus cares deeply about our intentions and about our actions and about our relationships. Jesus saying, don't be angry, is saying you are going to be angry. So when you get angry, you need to reconcile. When we mess up and fall short of the glory of God, our job is to reconcile that. Now, reconciliation isn't simply an apology. It's not simply I'm sorry, continue on about your ways. The true work of discipleship here that Jesus is going to continue to talk about through this section called the Sermon on the Mount is this act of reconciliation and intentionality. The work of a disciple is to say, yes, I know how I'm supposed to be. And when I mess up and when I fall short of the glory of God, the work of discipleship is saying, I bring this before God and before my neighbors, and we work for reconciliation to recoup, to remend our relationship together. That's the work of discipleship. And that's what we do here at Memorial. We work to try to be together, to apologize when we get wrong, and to work to reconcile that. That is the work that we encourage you to do in your own lives. Imagine a world where those who have anger pent up inside of them, instead of burying it deep down inside, they would confess it out loud to the Lord, and then they would confess it out loud to those for whom they had harmed or had harmed them. What could happen? This is what Jesus is saying to the Jews at the time and to us today. And it is my prayer as we go through the rest of Matthew and the rest of the Gospels, and of course through the New Testament, that these words that we read don't just simply stay on the page. They don't simply make a surface level meaning, but that you and I dig deeply into them and see what Jesus is getting at and realize that Jesus cares about our hearts, that Jesus cares about our intentions. Jesus cares about our interactions with others, because that is the work of true discipleship.